All right, so you're interested in serial killers, huh? Well, today we're going deep on this guy, Charles William
Oh,
Davis.
yeah, Davis.
Lived a seemingly normal life right there in Baltimore,
Right.
but he was hiding something,
Yeah,
a real dark secret.
definitely.
We've got excerpts from a Wikipedia article all about him, and let me tell you, this one, it's a wild ride.
It really is. Davis's case, it's like a study in duality almost, you know?
Oh, man.
Like on the surface, totally normal, productive member of society, holding down jobs, volunteering, all that.
Right, right.
But underneath,
Yeah.
man, there was this darkness just waiting to come out. And it did. It led him to commit some truly horrific crimes.
And that's what we're going to unpack today.
We are.
But here's the thing that gets me. Davis would actually call the authorities himself.
No way.
Oh, yeah. Like leading them straight to the bodies of his victims.
Whoa.
Almost like he was directing his own horror movie or something.
Huh. You know, we do see that sometimes, that kind of behavior in individuals who, well, they crave control, even in the middle of committing these awful crimes.
Yeah.
It's possible, I think, that Davis was getting, I don't know, some kind of twisted satisfaction from being the one to reveal the crime, you know,
Yeah.
placing himself right at the center of the investigation.
So it's not just the act itself, but the power he felt after in orchestrating the whole aftermath.
Exactly, like a puppet master.
Creepy. Okay, let's back it up a bit. Go back to the beginning. Davis, born 1947 in Baltimore. And get this, his father, a police lieutenant.
Oh, wow. The irony.
Right. Makes you think.
Definitely makes you stop and think. I mean, growing up in a law enforcement family, that must have given him a unique understanding of police procedures.
Oh, yeah.
Maybe even, I don't know, a sense of invincibility, you know?
Mm.
It's hard to say for sure, but it's definitely another layer to this already pretty complex story.
Yeah.
It's like he was raised with the rule book
Uh-huh.
and then just decided to chuck it out the window in the most horrific way possible.
Yeah.
And it's not like he was showing obvious signs early on or anything. I mean, he held down jobs, was an electrician, a security guard, even volunteered as an assistant chief at a rescue squad. Crazy, right?
That's wild.
Talk about a chameleon.
Seriously. But, you know, that ability to blend in, to present this facade of normalcy,
Yeah.
it's actually pretty common. You see it a lot in individuals who commit these kinds of crimes. They can be, well, incredibly good at compartmentalizing, keeping that dark side completely hidden,
Oh, totally.
even from the people closest to them.
It is chilling. The person you sit next to on the bus, the friendly face at the store, you just never know.
Nope, never know.
But the article does mention a 1973 conviction for a handgun violation. Maybe a little glimpse of the darkness starting to peek through.
Possibly. I mean, a single firearms violation doesn't necessarily scream future violent offender or anything.
Right.
But it does, you know, it suggests a certain willingness to disregard the law.
A potential red flag.
Looking back, yeah, maybe.
A crack in that facade. Okay, so let's get into the murders. September 1975, things change. Davis goes on a date with Lydia Norman, and when she refuses his advances, he strangles her.
Right.
This seems to be the turning point. His crimes escalate from assault to murder.
Yeah, this first murder, it really suggests that rejection, or maybe, you know, the perceived loss of control was a big trigger for him. The violence, it becomes a way to assert his dominance.
A twisted reaction.
Totally. A terrifyingly twisted reaction to a perceived threat, you know, to his ego.
Wow. So this normal date turns into this horrific display of power and control.
It does.
And then he makes those calls to the authorities,
The calls.
leading them right to the bodies. It's like he wanted to make sure his work was seen, acknowledged.
There could be a bunch of psychological factors at play there. It could be a way of taunting the police, you know, showing off his superior knowledge, control over the whole thing.
Oh, yeah.
Or maybe it's a twisted way of trying to get recognition, a need to be acknowledged, to be seen as the author of these horrific acts.
Like he needed to be the artist and the critic.
Exactly, of his own macabre masterpiece.
Oh, that's awful. Okay, December 1975. He kidnaps Kathleen Cook, brutally murders her. And guess what? He calls it in.
Ugh.
But this time, it's even more disturbing because he mistook Cook for someone else. Just completely random. That's terrifying.
That is a significant detail, yeah. It suggests that his violence wasn't always targeted, you know, or personal.
Right.
There's this element of impulsivity,
Right.
recklessness that just makes his crimes even more unpredictable. and frightening.
Yeah, because then it really could be anyone.
It could. Anyone at any time could become a victim.
It's like he's playing this deadly game of chance with people's lives. August 1976. Peggy Pumpian, just asking for directions, becomes his next victim. Robbed, raped, and shot. The violence, it's just escalating. And the fear in Baltimore, I can't even imagine.
Oh, I bet.
It must have been palpable.
Yeah, and that escalation of violence, that's something, that we often see in these types of cases.
Right.
It's like the perpetrator, they need to keep upping the ante, trying to get a more intense experience each time. It's a horrifying thought, but it's important to try to understand that pattern if we want to catch these guys.
Absolutely. Horrifying escalation for sure. But then there's a weird twist. September 1976, he rapes another woman but doesn't kill her. Why the change? It's so puzzling.
It is a good question. And honestly, it highlights just how limited even the most thorough psychological analysis can be. We can look for patterns, for triggers, but at the end of the day, human behavior.
Unpredictable.
Totally. Maybe there was something specific about that encounter, something that made him hesitate.
Okay.
Or maybe just a random decision. We may never know for sure.
So even with all we've learned about him, there's still this dark corner of his mind that's a total mystery.
There is. And that's part of what makes these cases so fascinating.
Yeah.
And so disturbing.
For sure. Okay, February 1977, he strikes again. This time as Carol Willingham, and she's pregnant. He beats her, robs her, rapes her. His victims, it's almost always women, often alone, vulnerable. Says a lot about his need for power and control.
Absolutely. There's this clear pattern of predatory behavior there. He's preying on those he perceives as weak or easy to control. It just feeds into that need for dominance, for asserting his will over others in the most brutal way possible.
And it's a pattern, unfortunately, that we see over and over again in so many cases of violence against women.
It is.
But thankfully, this reign of terror, it was about to come to an end. July 1977, a routine traffic stop, stolen license plates, leads to the discovery of a stolen CB radio in his car.
Yeah.
You never know what seemingly tiny detail will blow the whole thing wide open.
Right. It's amazing how often a minor infraction, like a stolen license plate, can just unravel this huge web of criminal activity,
Totally.
like a domino effect.
Exactly. And he tries to play it cool, of course.
Right.
Provides a fake receipt for the radio. They actually release him at first. But remember that stolen credit card he used? Well, that's about to be his downfall.
How so?
Just wait. It's a classic example of good, thorough investigative work. Even when a suspect seems to have an explanation, you got to follow every lead, every detail. It can make all the difference.
It really can.
And in this case, it did. The stolen credit card leads police to a previous rape victim. And she bravely identifies Davis. Game over.
Wow. The courage of victims, their willingness to come forward, we can't underestimate that. It's often their testimony, their willingness to relive their trauma that puts these guys away. So powerful.
So true. So August 1977, Davis is finally caught, Reno, Nevada. Back then, before the internet, before all these databases, tracking fugitives across state lines, that was a lot harder.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
It's a testament to the dedication and persistence of law enforcement,
Yeah.
Piecing together clues, following leads, until they finally catch him.
Absolutely. Real dedication.
And once he's caught, Davis confesses. To the murders of Cook and Pumpian, why confess after all that? After going to such lengths to stay free?
It's a good question. One that keeps criminologists up at night, for sure. There are a lot of theories about why someone might confess after denying involvement for so long. Maybe he felt relief, like a weight lifted off his shoulders.
Makes sense.
Or maybe it was one last attempt to control the narrative, to get his side of the story out there.
Interesting. A little glimpse into the mind of a killer.
Exactly. And it reminds us there's rarely just one simple answer, one explanation for these kinds of actions.
Right. Okay, so that brings us to the trials and the aftermath.
All right.
They actually held multiple trials in different counties because of how high profile the case was.
Oh, I see. A legal strategy.
Exactly. Trying to make sure he got a fair trial with all the media attention and everything. Trying him in different venues. It was a way to minimize bias.
Smart.
Yeah. This case is all over the news, nationwide. So in 1978, he is convicted for Cook's murder, gets a life sentence. Then another life sentence in 1979 for Pumpian's murder, even though they tried for a mistrial. And finally, in 1980, a third life sentence for Norman's murder. This one, he could be eligible for parole after 48 years.
Wow. 3 life sentences.
That's heavy. The sentences really reflect just how horrific his crimes were.
Yeah,
And society's need to hold him accountable.
for sure.
But here's where things take a turn. A really unexpected turn. In the early 1980s, Davis is interviewed by, get this, John Douglas.
No way, the John Douglas.
The one and only.
Wow, it's huge.
Right.
He's he's like a legend, a pioneer in FBI profiling. His work has had a massive impact on law enforcement.
Oh, yeah. He was fascinated by the criminal mind.
Yeah.
And he was convinced that studying these guys, even the ones who committed the worst crimes, was the key to understanding how to catch them.
That's amazing.
It was risky, definitely controversial back then,
I bet.
but man, it got results.
He said.
So Davis, through his horrific actions, he actually ends up contributing to the very field that's dedicated to understanding and catching guys just like him.
Wow. It's a strange kind of unsettling twist, isn't it?
It is. But it just shows you how complex, how paradoxical criminal justice can be. Sometimes the best way to fight darkness is to really delve into it, to try and understand where it comes from.
It's true.
It's like staring into the abyss, hoping to learn its secrets.
Mm.
And John Douglas, he wasn't afraid to get up close and personal with that abyss.
He wasn't. He knew that to catch these predators, you had to get inside their heads. And sometimes the best way to do that is to go right to the source.
Absolutely. So as of January 2025, Charles William Davis is still alive.
He is.
Yep. Imprisoned at the Jessup Correctional Institution. His story, it's just this chilling reminder,
Of what?
of the darkness that can hide beneath the surface of seemingly ordinary lives.
It's true. Evil can wear so many faces, and understanding the complexity of criminal behavior, it's crucial if we want to fight violence and, injustice.
Absolutely. Well, we've covered a lot in this first part of our deep dive. We've gone from his early life to the escalation of his crimes, his capture, the trials, and that unexpected meeting with John Douglas.
We have. It's been quite a journey.
It has, and it's not over yet. Next time, we're going even deeper into criminal profiling. We're going to explore how John Douglas's work, it revolutionized criminal investigations.
Yeah.
And it's still shaping law enforcement today. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone. Last time, remember, we left off with Davis behind bars, but then having these intense conversations with John Douglas, the FBI profiling pioneer. I still can't get over that. It's wild to think about. A convicted murderer, like actually helping the FBI figure out how criminals think.
It does seem kind of, counterintuitive, but those conversations, they were actually super important to how criminal profiling developed. Douglas knew to catch these guys, predators like Davis, you couldn't just rely on the physical evidence. It wasn't enough. You had to get into their heads, understand what makes them tick, their motivations, vulnerabilities, and who better to give you that insight than someone who's, done that.
So in a way, Davis becomes a part of this effort to stop future crimes.
Right.
Unwillingly, of course, but still fascinating. What did Douglas actually learn from him, though? Like specifically, what nuggets of insight did he manage to pull out of those talks?
Well, the exact details of their conversations, those are confidential, but we know Douglas was really interested in Davis's ability to blend in, to appear totally normal despite all that darkness inside. And remember, Davis held jobs, volunteered. The guy was a master of disguise.
Right. Like that whole chilling idea of the killer next door, someone you might see at the grocery store, I don't know, chat with at a barbecue. It's like something out of a movie, but it's all too real.
And that's exactly the kind of insight Douglas was looking for. He realized these seemingly ordinary people, they could be capable of just incredible acts of violence. And by studying their behavior, their motivations, you could start to build a framework for understanding them.
So it's almost like he was creating this blueprint of the criminal mind, piece by piece, using these conversations with, actual criminals as his guide.
Exactly. It wasn't just about the physical evidence anymore. It was about understanding this whole psychological puzzle.
Yeah. Okay, but let's shift gears for a minute and talk about the impact Davis's crimes had on Baltimore. This wasn't just some case in a textbook. This was real life, real people living in fear. Can you imagine knowing there's a serial killer out there targeting women?
Oh, it must have been terrifying. The psychological impact on a community, immeasurable, really.
I bet. People looking over their shoulders, questioning their neighbors, living with this constant sense of dread.
It's trauma, collective trauma that can, stick around long after the perpetrator is caught.
Right, because it's that chilling realization that evil can be anywhere, even in your own neighborhood.
Mhm.
And Davis, he was so good at blending in. It could have been anyone. The guy who bags your groceries, the person you pass on your morning run.
It's a terrifying thought, and it really underscores why it's so important to understand these guys, how they manage to live these normal lives while harboring all this darkness.
Speaking of how normal he seemed, what about the media coverage? I mean, this case was huge. I'm guessing it was a total media frenzy.
Oh, absolutely. Davis's crimes, they captivated the media. I mean, you had the seemingly random violence, the fact that he was calling the police himself, the image of this, normal guy who turned out to be a monster.
Right.
It was it was sensational.
It's the kind of story that grabs you and just doesn't let go.
Right.
But do you think all that media attention, did it help the investigation or does it make things harder?
It's tricky. I mean, media coverage, it's a double-edged sword. On the one hand, it can bring in tips from the public, raise awareness, put pressure on law enforcement to solve the case quickly.
Okay.
But on the other hand, it can create a lot of noise, misinformation. It can even mess with the investigation, influence witnesses or potential jurors.
So it's about finding that balance.
It is. Between keeping the public informed and protecting the integrity of the investigation. And that's a tension that law enforcement and the media, they're constantly grappling with in these kinds of cases.
Do we know anything about how people saw Davis, like the public? Was he totally demonized by the media? Or was there any attempt to, understand his motivations?
It's hard to say for sure, but, given what he did and the media's tendency to sensationalize things, it's probably safe to say that the public perception of Davis was pretty negative.
Yeah, I mean, it's understandable. Hard to look past those brutal acts.
Right.
Did Davis himself ever talk to the media? Try to, control the story?
Actually, there's no record of him ever giving an interview or making a statement to the press. Once he was caught, he kind of just went silent, left everyone wondering, what his motive was.
So he was willing to talk to John Douglas, help him understand the criminal mind, but not to the public. That's interesting.
It is. Maybe he felt that Douglas, as an expert, could actually understand him, see beyond the horrible acts to the complexity of it all.
Like he was looking for a specific kind of understanding, one that wasn't about judgment or condemnation.
Maybe. Or maybe it was just a calculated move. He realized cooperating with Douglas, it could potentially help him somehow.
Right. We may never know. But one thing's for sure, Davis's crimes, they left a mark on Baltimore, like a scar on the city's soul.
And that's something we often forget about in these discussions, We focus on the killer, his motives, his methods. But we can't forget the victims, their families, the communities, forever changed by these acts of violence.
It's this ripple effect, right? It extends way beyond the crime scene, touches so many lives in ways we can't even see.
Exactly. And it's a reminder that justice, it's not just about catching the bad guy. It's also about acknowledging the pain, the trauma, and the long, long road to healing for everyone who was affected.
Well said. So, in this part of our deep dive, we've talked about the impact of Davis's crimes on Baltimore, the media frenzy surrounding the case, and the mystery of his motives.
We have.
But there's more to come.
There is.
Next time, we're going back to the world of criminal profiling. We're going to explore how John Douglas's work, it revolutionized criminal investigations. And we'll talk about the ethics of it all, the potential pitfalls, because even the most advanced techniques, they have their limitations.
They do.
So stay with us. We'll be back soon. All right, welcome back to our deep dive on Charles William Davis. So we've talked about his crimes, the impact on Baltimore, and his talks with John Douglas, that FBI profiler, remember?
Yeah.
Well, now I want to focus on the legacy of his case. How did cases like his shape the world of criminal profiling? Like, what did we learn?
Well, David, even though he didn't mean to, he kind of became this case study in a field that was just starting to, gain traction back then, criminal profiling. And his interviews with John Douglas, they were like a window into the mind of a serial killer, helped us understand how these guys operate.
It's weird, though, right?
What is?
That this brutal criminal, he ends up helping the very people who are trying to catch guys just like him. Like, that's got to be a strange feeling.
It is a strange twist, for sure. But that's the thing about criminal profiling, to understand the darkness, you got to get close to it. And Douglas, he knew you couldn't just rely on physical evidence or the old ways of investigating. You had to understand the psychology, the motivations, the patterns, the things that connect these seemingly random cases.
So he was creating like a roadmap, of the criminal mind,
Yeah.
using these conversations with real-life criminals as his guide.
Exactly.
That's groundbreaking. But it must have been so challenging, too. I mean, how do you translate those conversations into, like, actual techniques that cops can use?
Well, Douglas, through his interviews with Davis and, other offenders, he started to notice these recurring themes, patterns. He looked at their backgrounds, their relationships, their methods, how they interacted with their victims, every little detail that might offer some insight.
So it's like this big puzzle, right?
It is.
But instead of a picture, you're trying to understand a person, a dangerous person.
That's it. And it's not an easy puzzle. There's always pieces missing and, people can be unpredictable. But after studying enough cases, Douglas started to see common threads, certain characteristics, behaviors that popped up again and again.
So it's not about finding some, like, magic formula, but more about recognizing patterns, tendencies, things that can help investigators narrow things down.
Yeah, exactly. Those patterns, they could be anything from demographics like age, job, social skills, to even little things like what kind of car they drive or how they talk to their victims.
Okay, but that seems like it could be, I don't know, prone to bias. If you're using past cases, and those cases might, like, overrepresent certain groups of people, doesn't that risk creating stereotypes and, leading to unfair targeting?
That's a really good point and a valid concern. That's why nowadays profiling is about using those patterns as guides, not as, the be-all and end-all.
Right.
They should be part of a thorough investigation. You still need evidence, analysis, and you got to avoid bias every step of the way.
So it's a tool, not the whole toolbox.
Right.
Okay, so back to Charles William Davis. If we were to use modern profiling techniques on his case, what would stand out? Like, what would we see today that they maybe missed back then?
Well, for starters, Davis's whole, normal guy act, that would be a red flag. Profilers today, they're trained to look past appearances because sometimes the most dangerous people are the ones who are really good at blending in.
So the whole "he was so quiet" thing, that wouldn't fly anymore.
Not as much. We've learned that evil doesn't always look, evil. Sometimes it's charming, friendly.
What about the phone calls? The ones he made to the police, leading them to the bodies. Does that fit into any known patterns?
Oh, absolutely. That kind of behavior, inserting himself into the investigation, that often points to a need for control, a desire for attention, maybe even some twisted sense of satisfaction in, being the one to reveal the crime.
Yeah.
Profilers today, they might see that as a sign of maybe narcissistic personality disorder or some other psychological issue.
So even those weird, seemingly random actions, they can actually be clues for trained investigators.
Totally. Every little detail matters. It all helps build a more complete picture of the offender, understanding why they do what they do, and maybe even predicting their next move.
This has been fascinating. A little disturbing, too, I gotta say. But it feels like we've just scratched the surface here. What are some of the key takeaways you want to leave our listeners with?
Well, I think Davis's case, as awful as it is, it shows us how complex human behavior can be. The line between good and evil, it's not always so clear, and darkness can hide anywhere.
It's a scary thought.
Yeah.
That you never really know what's going on inside someone's head.
Yeah. But it also shows how important criminal profiling is. As a way to understand and fight violence. It's not perfect, but it's helped solve a lot of crimes. And as we learn more about the human mind, profiling is only going to get better.
So it's like this constant evolution. We're always learning, trying to stay ahead of the darkness.
Exactly. And it takes constant vigilance, a commitment to doing things the right way, and remembering that we're dealing with people, complex, contradictory people.
Any final thoughts for our listeners? Something to, chew on as we wrap up?
Well, the human mind, it's powerful and mysterious. Trying to understand it, all of it, the good and the bad, it's a journey that honestly probably never ends, but it's a journey worth taking. Because somewhere in that darkness and that understanding, we might find the answers we need to stop these tragedies from happening and make the world a safer place.
Well said. Thank you for joining me on this deep dive into the Charles William Davis case and the world of criminal profiling. It's been quite a ride. And until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep exploring the depths of the human experience. We'll be back soon with another deep dive.